So, a couple of nights ago, I had one of the scariest experiences of my life. I'm a soldier stationed on Fort Bliss here in El Paso, Texas. I'm housed in East Bliss, so our barracks are relatively new, only about 12 years old or so. On Sunday, I went to bed around 10 o'clock so I could get to PT without being tired, and I had a strange dream. I had a dream that I was walking around the base and pigeons were landing on me and pecking my head, maybe one or two pecks and then flying away. They weren't aggressive or painful. They were light little taps on my head and around my head, and I kept swinging at them to shoo them away. However, when I got pecked around the 10th time, I woke up. And this is where it got weird. When I woke up, I felt 5 fingers lightly placed on top of my head. It wasn't full palm. It was like a basketball player holding a basketball with his fingertips, but with far less pressure. It was a soft touch. But when I opened my eyes, I could physically feel the fingers swipe away quickly, even to the point that I felt them slightly rub my scalp. I jumped up as fast as I could and turned my light on. I looked under my bed, at my window, in my closet, everywhere, trying to see if someone had gotten to my room. There was nothing. No sign of anyone being in my room or anything at all. I have no clue what happened, though I do have a theory that it could have been my hair moving from waking up. However, I know what it feels like when my hair moves while I'm laying down. It somewhat feels like bugs crawling on me. That feeling that night felt exactly like 5 fingers on my head, to every detail and movement, and even made a lot of sense to the weird dream I had. Does anyone have any logical theories of what it could have been? Or could it seriously have been something paranormal? I'm incredibly curious to know, or at least be able to explain, what happened. I was around 9 years old. My room was small, and on the opposite side of my bunk bed is a large closet door mirror which covers the entire wall of the room. For around 2 weeks straight, I was suddenly peacefully awoken in the night, without any touches or noises. When I would look over, I would see a woman. Her body was shrouded in complete darkness without any distinguishable features. She wore a long white wedding gown and stood staring into the massive mirror. She never moved either, and wasn't looking directly at me, just forward. The first night I thought it was a dream, but then it happened again the night right after. I distinctly remember pinching myself as hard as I could to wake up, but realized I was totally conscious. I was never scared, and I even remember thinking to myself, why am I not? Then I would just cover myself in my blanket and drift back to sleep. After a week, I finally decided to tell my mother, who told me it's my dad pulling a prank on me. At the age of 9, I believed this. He told me he had some projector in my room displaying the images. My mom told me to scream for her when I see it again, and one night I was about to, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. The lady never bothered me. It wasn't at all scary to see her. To repeat, this happened every single night for about 2 weeks. Days later, like usual, I was awakened and saw the woman standing in her usual position. But something odd was next to her. A man, shrouded in complete darkness with zero features, was standing next to her, holding a hand. He was wearing a black tuxedo. Even then, I wasn't scared and went back to sleep. After that, I never saw her again. I was never awakened in the night randomly like that. It just all went away. When I was older and asked my mum about it, and she told me she knew that house had something very wrong with it. I knew it was haunted, but didn't want to scare me. She hadn't had any paranormal experiences with it, but knew something was up. I have some more stories from this house, but none even go near how insane this one is. The house wasn't some Victorian creepy mansion. It was a usual blue-collar neighborhood house at the corner of a busy street. Each time I tell this story, I begin to cry. I have no idea why. I don't ever cry much, but for some reason, I'm tearing up just typing this alone. It's so odd. Let's start from the beginning. I visited a friend in Indiana a few years ago. I was on my way to the supermarket when I walked past an abandoned house with a rusted out car parked halfway up the driveway. The car just looked savage. It was missing a door, it didn't have a single window, and there were a very graphic word written with white spray paint on the hood. I didn't think much about it. It is Indiana. You see these things every now and then. But then someone stepped out of the house. Some Ed Gein looking bastard coughing up a lung. He lived there. Not only that, he got in the tetanus coloured rust car and started it. It was the creepiest shit I'd ever seen. Like watching a machine come back from the dead. So yeah, I snapped a photo of it. I could never have guessed that thing would even start, let alone roll out of the driveway. I'm a bit of a car guy. When I saw on that Indiana driveway was a rusted out 61 Ford Zephyr Mark II, and seeing it like that was just tragic. So to share the pain, I uploaded it. Apparently, I wasn't the only one with a lot of opinions. This started a long thread. People not only responded, but uploaded their own pictures. Pictures of everything from rusted classics that had been stripped and abused, to videos of amateur Franken cars. Hell, one guy just uploaded an ice cream truck abandoned in a swamp. I swear I saw an alligator trying to get in the driver's seat. We started sharing these stories of trashed and creepy cars from all around the country, and soon, the world. Over the course of a few weeks, we sort of split off from a larger community and started something we called Creepy Cars. I was the main admin. Yeah, the one and only. Creepy Cars was not just about funny and creepy content, it was about enthusiasm. Sure, we all groaned over the various hack jobs, but it was also sort of a collective mourning. There was a genuine interest in the content uploaded, and of course, there was passion. I was called a bunch of times to moderate discussions on rat rods, for example. We had some internal jokes and themes. We had Don't Wrench and Drive Custom Job Fridays, New Year, New Car posts, all in good spirit. We had this one thing where we posted the ugliest selfies of ourselves and asked people to post what kind of car it looked like we owned. This one time, a guy found his car posted and reached us how we could fix it. We raised $12,000 for the restoration. So this is the kind of environment I put my time in. These were good, honest people. So when I saw this car, this random-ass rust bucket cruising down the road, I wasn't being malicious. It was just fun. Just a quick video. Nothing to think of. It was last May. Minnesota in springtime. I was dog-sitting Sally for a friend and decided to take a long walk by the river before it got too dark outside. All in all, about a 30-minute walk. Not too bad, and Sally was happy to get out for a bit. We were just about to head back when Sally started whining. She put her tail between her legs and cuddled up next to me. I looked around, but couldn't see what she'd scared of. I brought out my phone. If it was a wild animal, I wanted a photo. Worst case scenario, I could call the police. Then I heard this strange metallic sound. It sounded like a rattling engine, like something had come loose. An engine belt slapping around, bearings shot to hell. It sounded like a dying vehicle, and yet something came rolling around the corner. The first time I saw it, I was amazed it even moved. It looked like some sort of cartoon, something forgotten back in the 70s. Possibly a pacer. It had this thick layer of mud spread out across the hood, covering a few forest green paint spots. There were lit candles spread out across the dashboard, which was the only light coming from the car at all. And in the driver's seat was this, I don't know how to describe it. Weirdo, I guess. He had a black motorcycle helmet with a crude face spray painted in white. He had this faux fur coat with a raccoon pattern and bleach white leather gloves. He was leaning back against the only seat that remained in the car, a seat that was barely anything but a rusted frame. I didn't even think about it. I recorded it going past me down the street. The driver was looking at me all the way. The large helmet slowly turned to face me every inch of the way. I should have listened to Sally. She was pulling on the leash trying to get away. Whining, barking, throwing herself against the leash. She knew this was bad. Really bad. But I just stood there, mouth open like a fish out of water. I had no idea what I was looking about. Last thing I saw as it rounded the corner was the license plate. Hot Rod. I could hear it going down the street 5 minutes after it passed me. When Sally finally calmed down, I carried her back home. I had a video to upload. This thing went viral. It spread from our little community to pretty much everything. 56,000 upvotes on Reddit in a couple of hours. People were reacting to it, adding musing to it, making memes out of it. Hot Rod was all I heard about for a week straight. I saw at least a dozen They See Me Rolling clips, all by different people. That was all fun and games, but I got this awful feeling in the pit of my stomach. When my buddy came to pick up Sally, she leapt into his arms, shivering. To her, none of this was fun. This was horror. Even 2 weeks after seeing the hot rod, it was still fresh on my mind. The driver had been staring at me like they knew who I was, like they were there for me. And then that awful noise, like an engine trying to kill itself. It sounded like it was already broken, but it just kept rolling past me nonetheless. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. By all accounts, the car should be stalling on the side of the road, and yet it didn't. That night, as I laid awake thinking about it, I could hear something in my kitchen. Half asleep, I checked it out. My oven was on highest setting. There was an electric hum rising and sinking as the temperature breathed. And as the temperature rose, there was a rhythmic thunking sound that just kept getting louder. I hurried to turn it off, only to realize that it was already off. I burned my hands pulling out the oven, and I had to crawl over the countertop to pull the plug. For about 10 minutes afterwards, I just stood there mouthing, "What the fuck?" over and over. It wasn't until I headed back to bed that I noticed the automated porch light was on. Something had moved outside. Since then, things got worse. First, it was just small things. Clock radio going off in the middle of the night, interference on my phone, losing Bluetooth signal on my headphones, small stuff. But over time, I started noticing other things. Lights flickering rhythmically in the supermarket, light posts fading in and out on the street, car alarms going off, but warping themselves to go faster and slower like a dying fire alarm. But the worst part came one day when I was driving home a few weeks ago. I'd been at a restaurant with a friend in the next town over. I took the freeway back home when my radio stopped working. By now, I was getting frustrated. Electronics just kept freaking out on me, and I had no idea why. That, and there was always that sense of threat looming in the air. There was always a sort of rhythmic pulse, like the hum of an engine, somewhere around me. I was just about to turn the radio off and on again when my engine stalled. Not just sputtered out, it just stopped. One big chunk sound, and then nothing. I slowly drifted to the side of the road. Turning the key didn't do a thing. I was just sitting there, my head resting on the steering wheel. You can't live out here without a car, and everything just seemed to work against me. I snapped out of it by the honk of a horn. It was this water-damaged car noise, combining a bright, choking yell with a gargle. At first I didn't even register it. It sounded so strange that I thought I'd imagined it. It wasn't until I heard it a second time that I looked up. Parked right next to me, door to door, was none other than the hot rod. Motorcycle helmet, driver and all. He was parked so close that I couldn't open my door. I just stared at the black helmet. It felt like that childlike spray-painted smiley face was not just a painting, but actually grinning at me, like it was widening every time I blinked. The driver held up a white leather glove and pointed down. He wanted me to roll down the window. "Not gonna happen," I mouthed back, shaking my head. Why was I scared? Why did I want to run? Almost as an answer to my question, the window started rolling down on its own. No way, I wasn't having that. I crawled over to the passenger seat and opened the door, only to have it slammed shut. An outside force held the door shut and the locks clicked. They kept clicking over and over in the same forced rhythm as the engine on the hot rod. This awful thunk noise over and over, like someone beating a dead motor back to life. My radio sparked back to life. A static burst crawled into my ear, sending a shiver across my arms. Delete. The sound was bright, pitch shifted, and ran through some sort of filter, like an old 1940s radio receiver. I couldn't tell what kind of voice it was. It was just this bland, broken stutter. I don't know. The video? You want the video? Delete it. I can't just... It's already out there. Even if I delete it, it's still... Delete it. I can't. It's still going to be there. Get it done. He didn't even have his hands on the steering wheel as the car pulled away. I could feel him staring at me from the broken side mirror. I just sat there, turning my car key over and over. When the engine finally woke up, it screeched, clunked, and complained. It shut itself off a few times, but it got me back home. The entire side of my car was covered in rust, and that car never started again. This was the first time I called the police. They didn't have a car with that license plate registered, so they couldn't do much to help. They didn't understand what I was talking about. Some guy was angry about me putting up a video, pulling up next to me, asking me to delete it. How could I explain the threat? How could I make them listen? I asked the people at Creepy Cars as well. They didn't understand. It sounded like paranoia or some sort of science fiction. Cars don't just act on their own, they're controlled. My window couldn't have rolled down on its own. Radios don't just say whatever they want. And doors won't just slam shut. I was coming off as a lunatic, and people were starting to accuse me. You just want attention, they said. You miss having notifications. From this point on, it just got a whole lot worse. I was getting calls that answered themselves through the night. Calls demanding me to delete it over and over and over. Strange engine noises going by outside at odd hours of the night. Lamps popping in their sockets. Hell, at one point, my TV turned on and kept looping half-second clips from the monsters. Didn't stop until I pulled the plug. It was getting harder and harder to go to work. At one point, as I was taking the bus, the damn thing just refused to start. 20 people were stranded in a parking lot. I had to ask a work friend to take me home. 35 minutes in the wrong direction. This was by the end of last week. I've called in sick since. A few days ago, I heard the porch light explode. There were footsteps outside. He was just outside, I knew it. I was ready for him to bang on the door, to peek in the windows, something. I'd grasped a hammer and hugged it like a teddy bear, begging God not to have to use it. But the driver didn't do a thing, didn't knock, ring the doorbell, or peek inside the windows. He just stood there for the better part of an hour, waiting for me to delete it. At one point I just yelled at him, "Just do something! What the hell do you want from me?" Of course I knew what he wanted. He wanted me to delete it. I already had, but it was out there, and there was nothing stopping it from spreading. When he finally left, I felt tears rolling down my face. Just relief. I'd been so tense, my hands had cramped into claws. I could just barely let go of the hammer. Look, I haven't been out for a week. I've lived on literally everything in my fridge and freezer. Every leftover, every jar, all of it. The fridge shut down completely on Thursday, but by then, I didn't have much else than cornflakes and cup noodles anyway. Last night, I decided I'd give it a go. I brought my hammer and went outside. Immediately, I heard a rumble. A broken engine. Then another. Then a lot. The hot rod was just the start. 6 cars and a motorcycle rolled around the corner. These broken, battered machines, flat tires, rusted frames, broken windows, oil dripping from broken engine blocks, howling engines, forcing these machine corpses to retch forward, one gasoline gulp at a time. And the drivers, all dressed in these black motorcycle helmets, painted with these crude faces. Angry, happy, sad, screaming, the entire emotional spectrum. Dressed in these absurd jackets, some fur, some cracked leather. One of them had this yellowish crash dummy looking suit, one pant leg torn off at the knee. One of them was missing a shoe, revealing a dry white foot with 2 missing toes and black nails. I just dropped my hammer. They were a goddamn gang. There was nothing I could do. I ran back inside, slammed the door, and picked up my phone. Of course, it didn't work. Open the door. It was a different voice, brighter, spoken by one of the drivers. A woman, trying her best to sound as kind and patient as she could. There was something there. A threat, just beneath the surface, trying to break through. Open the door, please. I didn't. I couldn't. My body wasn't responding. I was just slowly inching back, as if being quiet enough would make them go away. I found myself holding my breath, looking for a place to hide. You're going to open the door now. There was a gurgling sound, someone spitting up water, splashing against the door. Seconds later, I could see the door handle rusting in a matter of seconds as the whole mechanism fell apart. It took the door being battered down for me to finally snap out of it. The crash dummy driver was closing his visor back up, but I caught a glimpse of a sickly pale face with a tint of algae green lips. Long yellow teeth sunk into black gums. Then, the visor was back down, showing a sad, spray-painted smiley face. Crash dummy stepped aside, and a small woman stepped in. She had this oversized motorcycle helmet with a cartoonish painted grin on it. She had this plastic silvery disco jacket and snow boots. If it weren't for all my lights being broken, she'd sparkle. Should have opened the fucking door. Dig it? I just ran. I locked myself in the bathroom as they went to town on my furniture. I heard smashing, cutting, sawing, some power tools barely functioning. Little battery-powered machines coming back on to destroy. I just crawled into my bathtub in the dark, pulling down the shower curtains as I stumbled back. I tried forcing air into my lungs, but I just couldn't stop panting. This is what Sally had felt like. That first night when she saw the hot rod, I'm sure of it. Another door? Really? She cackled. This awful bird-like sound. I could hear something in her lungs rattle. You're a fucking idiot. I heard a visor open, a retching gargle and a metallic fizzle. Something loud, splintering the bathroom door by the handle. A small hand gently letting the light in. Careful steps came towards me as I heard glass shatter in another room. Why didn't you delete it? She asked. We asked you nicely. You can't. I saw the silhouette of the oversized helmet through the shower curtain. She wasn't moving, not even breathing. I deleted the video. The others, they copied it, and... Video? She scoffed. What fucking video? I just froze. What the hell were they talking about? If not the video, then... I don't... What do you want? You stole our name. That's our name. What? What are you... She pulled the shower curtain off me and grabbed me by the throat. She had this cramp-like strength, like she didn't know how to hold back. I just started coughing, feeling these little bone dagger fingers dig into my windpipe. Wicked little slug bugs. You think you got the creepy cars? You think you're it? I could almost see her eyes through the visor. I looked closely, but there was nothing there. Just darkness. We have creepy cars. You have minutes to live. I tried to say it. I tried it over and over. To say I didn't know, that I didn't understand. I begged, I cried, I pushed and kicked. This impossibly thin little arm, barely anything but bone and sinew, held me back. Somehow, she heard me. She listened. She dropped a phone in my lap, an older iPhone, cold and wet to the touch. It had this mutated blue sunflower-looking thing as a background image. It was already logged in on my accounts. All of them. She watched me delete it. All of it. Creepy cars disappeared overnight from every single platform. Confirmed, confirmed, confirmed. Are you sure? The phone kept asking. And I shakily accepted all of it. When it was all said and done, she just took her phone back and left. My place is trashed. Even without a front door, I don't know if I can go out there. I've just sat here for the better part of a day. My computer started working a few hours ago, and I had to say something. There's a rusty car in the field outside, and I'm starting to question if it's one of them. There's no one there. Maybe it's just a warning, or maybe it's always been there. I don't know. I'm questioning everything. I'm not going out there anytime soon. Maybe it is over. Maybe it's just started. They left a black motorcycle helmet for me. I'm the fourth generation to live in our house, so we've been in the same spot for about 120 years. There's this large mansion just up the road. It takes maybe 2 or 3 minutes to reach by foot. It has a large yard, and once owned several acres of farmland and pine forest. Now, the house stands alone with a bunch of outhouses. The last person of the rather wealthy family to pass away was a woman. Let's call her Agnes for the sake of anonymity, about 10 years ago. She was widowed and childless, very prim and proper and formal. My mother used to be friends with her foster daughter when she was young, and she recalls being afraid of Agnes, who was strict and firm and insensitive. I would later perceive Agnes as proper and strict, but also kind and friendly, and I spent many hours at the house in her company as an older child and preteen. The house itself had 2 floors, and I never visited the upper level. I was strictly confined, mostly by choice, to the kitchen and the small recreational space where the TV was. When I first began popping by for a visit, Agnes's husband was still around. The thing about this house is, as my mother recalls, that it's always uninviting and eerie. It was very scarcely lit, with gravel walks leading up to the house, either through the main entry or the unofficial entryway, fitted to allow horse carriages, etc. Mom would recall that her and the rest of the village girls would be iffy about walking past the house post-nightfall, especially if alone. She recalls they never spoke of it. It was just a general feeling of being unnerved and watched. This feeling was present during the day as well, as per my own experience, and was tangible for as long as Agnes resided there. If you were walking up the gravelways, there'd always be a second pair of footsteps. You might write it off as an echo, but it would halt simultaneously with your own steps if you stopped. The large windows of every outhouse and extra building were always black, and you couldn't see through them at any time during the day, although you would at times do a double take as you think you might have glanced something in one of them. Another thing I remember clearly is refusing to go to the bathroom while I visited Agnes. On the way to the bathroom was a large hallway from which the staircase leading to the second floor split off. I would inherently never look up the stairs, because whatever oppressive sensation you felt within the house seemed to emanate from the second floor. It was as if it poured down from the stairs, and in the hallway there was this giant mounted deer head whose eyes always seemed to be following your every move. I can't say I experienced a lot apart from these little details, and neither could my mom, but it was the entire feel of the house that left you feeling off. It was as if, as soon as you passed the gates, every sound died down, and you never felt completely alone. I remember hating passing a certain part of the gravel walkway that passed between 2 houses. It always felt as if someone was right behind you, as if whatever it was that was mirroring your steps had caught up to you by that point. Once you did pass, however, it would subside. This aura was very much persistent until Agnes passed away. As soon as she was gone, so was the aura of the house. There's a family consisting of a woman, 3 children, and a little spaniel living there now, and I haven't sensed any of the oppressive, hostile vibes since. The house feels like a completely regular old mansion now, rustic and fancy and regal. I haven't passed the gates for years, but when Agnes lived, the vibes radiated outside their bounds. You could feel it before you saw the house, and before you came within 100 feet of its proximity. That's all gone. I can't help but wonder if Agnes's relatives, her entire ancestry, was waiting for her and lingering. Perhaps they were waiting for her to join them, and as soon as she did, they found peace. I have no answers, except for the fact that the mansion was notably hostile and oppressive in nature for at least 60 years, and then everything changed. What do you believe the culprit might have been? And why did it change? This happened a couple of months ago. It actually makes me sick to my stomach to think about. I was sitting at my kitchen table in my usual spot. My 6-year-old daughter was on the second floor of my house in the upstairs living room, more or less right above my head. She was loudly shifting through her Lego box. To my left of the table is the underside of the staircase to the second floor. I can't see who's on the stairs or the top or bottom of the stairs from where I was sitting. If you were descending the stairs, the door to the room we use as an office is directly to the right across a short hallway from the bottom of the stairs. From my chair at the table, I can see the entire hallway between the bottom of the stairs and the door at the office. I can also see a sliver of the interior of the office. As I was sitting at the table and semi-listening to the noise my daughter was making with Legos, I heard someone start walking down the stairs. I wasn't really looking towards the office, but I saw the back of my daughter's head as she walked into the office. Or so I thought. A few seconds later, I heard someone start walking down the stairs, this time louder than the first time I heard it. I realized that something odd had just happened, so I looked towards the hallway. I watched as my daughter walked into the office with both her hands full of her Lego creations. I hurried over to the office and looked inside. My daughter was the only one there. She was putting her Legos on one of the desks. I asked her if she came down to the off and came back down again, but she said she hadn't. There wasn't enough time for her to go upstairs again and come back down. Also, I would have seen her come out of the office. I didn't see the face of the first daughter to go into the office, but the height appeared about right. The hair colour and length and shirt colour were correct for my daughter. I'm thoroughly creeped out by this, as creeped out as I was when my daughter used to wave and say goodbye to her closet when we get her up from naps and in the morning when she was around 2. I'm unsure what to make of this. I live in a house with shadow people when I was my daughter's age and really don't want to deal with anything creepy ever again. The sister that died before I was born. I have 4 siblings, but only 3 of them are alive. My brother was born in 1986, and in 1989, my mother gave birth to Haley, the one that died. When my mother was 7 months pregnant with Haley, she was taken to the hospital because the doctors thought she had appendicitis. She was operated on, and the next day, she went into early labour. After 3 months in an incubator, Haley was brought home, and things went well for a few weeks after they brought her home. Until one day, when my mum went to check on her after a nap. She was unresponsive. My parents drove her to the hospital, where it was discovered that Haley contracted golden staph and had fallen into a coma. Haley died a few days later. The infection wasn't noticed by the doctors before her discharge. My nightmares as a child. My earliest memory is when I was still a baby, not yet on solid foods. I remember crawling on the floor and my brother was next to me with something in his mouth. Then, Mum handed me something and instinctively put it in my mouth. Monkey see, monkey do. It was roast chicken. Not the store-bought kind, the slow, oven-baked chicken, marinated with potatoes and pumpkin that makes the whole house smell divine. That was the first solid food I'd ever eaten, and I can still remember the confusion and surprise of the taste. It was delicious. When I was a teenager, I told my mum about this memory, and her reaction to this was strange. I expected her to tell me to stop making up stories and give me a scolding for trying to get attention. But instead, she stood up and walked to her room, beckoning me to follow her. When we got to her room, she pulled out a box from a cupboard, sat it on the bed, and began rifling through it. I knew better than to ask what she was doing, so I instead just waited and watched. She was pulling out what looked like little trinket boxes and random assortments of miscellaneous objects I assumed had sentimental value. Then she pulled out a stack of photographs, flipped through them, and stopped at the one she was looking for. She handed me a baby picture I'd never seen before. It was me and my brother. I was about 8 months old, and my brother was 3 years old, and we were both sitting on the floor eating chicken. My mother had a picture of the first time I ate solid food, and I could see the surprise on my face in the picture. The same surprise I remember feeling when I tasted it. I tell you this story to give you a better understanding of my brain and the way it works. My brother is on the spectrum, and I suspect that I might be as well, but I've never been tested. When I was very young, maybe 4 or 5, I remember having these nightmares. I was in this never-ending nothingness that terrified me. It was dark, and there were these big circle things. I don't know how to describe what they looked like. I can see them in my memory, but if I try to draw them or describe them, I can't. They sort of look like massive coloured spheres, floating in pitch black nothingness. I had this same nightmare every night for, I'm not sure how long, until I learned how to change the channel. That's what I called it. After this, I went on all sorts of adventures in my dreams. Only sometimes, they didn't feel like they were my dreams. Sometimes I'd be somewhere I'd never seen before, with people I didn't recognize, doing things that felt like someone else's memory. There'd be people I'd never seen before, but somehow I knew them and they would recognize me. Like I'd been there before, and I had a sentimental attachment to the people and place. But I'd never been to those places or met those people. I never felt scared when I had these dreams, so I just let them play out. I was never in the same place, and I never dreamed about things that happened in my life. Not even askew with memory. Always in different places, with different people doing different things. And they always felt like a memory, but not my memory. I don't know what to make of this. I might just have a good imagination, but who knows? The scary room. My younger sister Molly was born 3 years after me, 1993. And my mother would tell the story a lot while I was growing up. Sometimes after Mum would put Molly down for a nap, she'd wake up screaming and staring at this one area in her room. This was when she was a newborn, and it continued until her toddler years. For whatever reason, she was scared of something in her room that clearly nobody could see. The haunted house. My childhood wasn't very stable, as we moved around a lot growing up. I was born in Queensland but moved to Victoria with my mother and brother when my mum was still pregnant with my younger sister. I was 2.5. One of the houses we lived in, I was 7 at the time, was the last house at the end of the road that connected to the highway. The highway had a bridge that went over the railway tracks, and our house was before the highway, with the railway going along the side of our property. Even though we were so close to the highway and railway, it was surprisingly quiet from what I remember. The area, primarily farmlands and small towns like the one we lived in. Not long after we moved in, strange things started to happen. We would hear what sounded like someone reading a newspaper coming from the kitchen, but there'd be nobody there. Or we'd hear coughing, but there was no apparent origin to said coughing. One night, me and my siblings were staying with our dad, and our mum was home alone. Mum was in the kitchen when she heard banging coming from the door leading to the laundry room. The banging slowly got louder and louder, and my mother, rightly so, was terrified. She was a stickler when it came to locking the doors at night, so she definitely locked the front door. But the banging wasn't coming from the front door, it was coming from the other door. The banging persisted for a few minutes, when it abruptly stopped, and it was quiet again. When she went to investigate, she discovered that the front door was still locked, and there was no way someone could have exited out the door without being heard. It was an old house with really creaky doors, and there were only 2 doors in the house. The front door that we rarely used, and the back door, and none of the windows in the sunroom opened. Then I started seeing something in my room at night. Me and my sister, 4 at the time, shared a room. There were bunk beds along the far right wall as you entered the room, and a window on the far left wall that looked out onto the front yard. I slept in the top bunk, and my sister in the bottom, giving me a clear view of the door and the window. I had this beaded curtain that hung on the inside of my door, so I would hear it if someone opened it. In hindsight, that probably wasn't the best idea, considering the other weirdness that had been happening in this house. Late at night, I would hear the chains rattling when the door was closed and stationary. My sister was fast asleep in the bottom bunk. The window was always closed, and my mum was such a light sleeper that she would have woken up if anyone was out of bed. Sometimes I would see what looked like a shadow of a figure standing next to the window, but I could never get a good look at what it was. I convinced myself that it was the moon casting shadows or something, because I sure as shit wasn't going to leave the safety of my bunk bed, past the door with the talkative beaded curtain, and towards this unknown thing standing next to the window in the dark of night. So I'd lay there looking at it while pretending to be asleep. It never moved or changed position, and I'd see it even if the curtains were closed, so it couldn't have been the moon casting shadows. To this day, I have no clue what that was. I didn't sleep with a nightlight, so it wasn't that. Maybe my overactive imagination, who knows? Other weird things happened in that house, but this is long enough, so I'll leave it there. The old house and the crazy cat lady. Around the time we were living in that house, our dad purchased a property up in the mountains, a few hours' drive from us. The house was really old. My guess, it was probably built in the 50s. Bare-bone brick and cement with an old wood fire, a chimney big enough for Santa's tush, and even a wombat under the veranda. The property was a 20-minute drive up the mountains and was on 100 acres. Nothing spooky happened there, unless you count me almost getting rear-ended by a bull, or the wombat incident. But there was Crazy Mary, who lived in a run-down cabin in the mountains. Picture Eleanor Abernathy running at you, screaming and throwing cats at you. That was the vibe I got every time we drove past her run-down cabin. I don't think I saw her that much when we drove past, and she mostly kept to herself, but the locals knew to stay away from her. This was back in the early 90s, so safety standards weren't as prevalent as they are today. My dad had heaps of old paddock bashers and tin cans in his arsenal, along with a few old postie bikes my brother liked to drive around the farm. My brother is a bit of a menace when it comes to anything on wheels. I remember standing on the back of Dad's ute while he was driving into town on what was a dirt road back then. It was a gorgeous summer day, and the tree was as far as the eyes can see, and the occasional kangaroo spotted through the tree line. I was looking at the trees when something caught my eye. It was the flicker of a light from the corner of my eye. I looked over to see what it was, and I saw a white fox. It was only for a second, and was gone as fast as it appeared, but it was stunning, is the word that springs to mind. The auras. My entire life, I've seen these weird specks of light in my vision, similar to migraine auras or what you see after you rub your eyes. They're objects of coloured orbs in front of me that I see all the time. Sometimes they move and change shape, size, or colour, but mostly they're just there in my visions and don't move. As a kid, I called them my imaginary friends and thought that everyone else saw the same thing, and it was normal. But when I'd mention it to my parents, I was accused of making things up to get attention, which is why I never mentioned them again after that. My mother started abusing me when I was 6, so I found comfort in writing from a very early age. And these auras sort of became a safe place for me. Something nobody else could see, and therefore couldn't be taken away from me, like so much that my mother stole from me growing up. I suffered a spinal cord injury and brain injury when I was 17 in 2007. The auras have stayed the same, but change when I get stressed or if I'm grieving, when I get a migraine or during a panic attack. But within the last few months, these orbs have started getting bigger, and I started to see something different. Something I have no logical explanation for. The foggy figure. Around the time that I noticed the orbs changing shape, I started seeing this. I don't know what it was. I first noticed it when I was leaving my kitchen. I was going past my fridge when I saw something in front of the fridge. It was roughly the size of a person, but with no distinguishing attributes or outline. It was translucent and like looking through clear contact. When I first saw it, I thought it was a trick of the light or something, so I moved to the other side of the room to look at it from a different direction. But it stayed there, motionless. I closed my eyes for a bit, and when I opened them, it was still there. Was confused as fuck and brushed it off as stress or something. Until I saw it again a few days later. This time it was near my front door. I was on my way to the bathroom when I saw it. The same size and shape, but unlike the first time I saw it, this time it felt like I was being watched. My heart started racing, and my skeptical brain was going haywire trying to conclude a logical answer to what I was seeing. Of course, my brain drew a blank. After this, I started seeing this figure a few times a day, usually around the same spot, right near my front door. And then I started seeing it at night. When I saw it during the day, it was like a translucent fog, but when I started seeing it at night, it was the same fogginess, but a lot darker. And instead of standing upright, it would be hovering over my bed. I never got any negative vibes from whatever this was. If anything, it felt like it was trying to protect me or help me. I didn't mention this to many people, but then something weird happened. A friend was over at my place one day, and when he was about to leave was when I saw this figure standing in its usual spot near the door. As he walked to the door, I saw the figure move towards him. Right as my friend walked through it, he stopped and said, "Ooh, I just got the chills. That was weird." Up until this point, I'd convinced myself that I was seeing things. But that, well, I explained everything weird that had been going on and what I was seeing, feeling somewhat unsettled by what had just happened. He was rightfully shaken by this, especially considering what he just felt. I haven't seen the figure for about a month, but every now and then I get the feeling that I'm being watched. Or I'll smell something without an explanation to what the smell is or where it's coming from. i.e., I'll be somewhere alone and not moving, and I'll smell something that shouldn't be there. Like the distinct smell of perfume with no origin to the smell. But sometimes the smell will be different, like shoe polish or the beach. I believe that this entity is still here because I think my cat can see it. There'll be times when I'm at home when I get that familiar feeling of being watched. I don't see anything, but my cat will perk up and start staring intently at this one particular spot, right near the door where I saw it before. Keep in mind that there's nothing of interest there, just a few boxes, a fold-up table, and my TV. The alarm and ghosts from my past. This is my most recent spooky encounter, and what's prompted me to share all of this weirdness with you. A few weeks ago, there was an alarm that kept going off at 12:52 a.m. It wasn't until day 3 that I figured out what it was. My digital clock had been set to that time, but I didn't set it. I don't even know how to. That afternoon, I received a message from a guy I went to high school with, informing me of the passing of a friend. Me and Greg had a history that I won't get into here. Greg died at 12:52 a.m. that night, after my clock went off for 3 nights in a row at exactly 12:52 a.m. Freaky. The number 3. A few people mentioned the significance of the number 3, which got me thinking of how often that number is in my life. My grandparents, dad's parents, had 6 kids, 3 girls and 3 boys. My parents had 3 kids and we were all 3 years apart. 1986, 1990, 1993. My mother's birthday is September 3rd. My sister's birthday is August 3rd. And my best friend's birthday is July 3rd. My birthday is October 9th, 1090. But 91,990 divided by 3 equals 30,363.3 recurring. Greg's birthday is April 23rd, and he died at age 33. Death in my life. I've experienced grief a lot more than most people have, but I'm not looking for sympathy, so please save the condolences. Shit happens, and that's that. I don't mean to sound so blasé about it, but I find it easier to be blunt about things like that rather than get into details. So here's a list of people that have died in my life. My sister died before I was born. I died when I suffered a spinal cord and brain injury when I was 17. The alcohol in my system was the only reason my heart was able to be restarted. When I was 19, my dad and uncle died in a plane crash. I was 24 when my grandfather died of a stroke after being in a diabetic coma. I was 29 when my other grandfather died of emphysema. When I was 31, my grandmother died of ongoing health complications. 3 months ago, my old manager and friend died. I found out about a month ago that a friend I went to school with died, and a few weeks ago, my friend I'd known since high school died from brain cancer. My papa was a Vietnam veteran and suffered from severe PTSD. Lots of things could cause a flashback, from a pot dropping on the floor, a car backfiring in a parking lot, or a helicopter flying overhead. He was also exposed to Agent Orange and battled cancer for as long as I could remember. When he died, he only had half of a lung on each side and was still fighting cancer in other areas of his body. He took a lot of medication multiple times a day, but he was still a wonderful grandfather. He made sure I understood my worth, not just as a girl, but as a human. He also made sure that I knew how to defend myself. He took me with him everywhere, and once he got too sick to leave the house much, he bought a video camera so that I could record all my performances, softball games, and high school ceremonies so that he could still see it all. Obviously, the two of us were extremely close, but by 5, I knew what to do when he was having a flashback and what medicine to give him and when. We were close enough that 90% I was the only one who could bring him back to the present during a flashback. Other family members used to yell and tell my mama to keep me away from him during these episodes, but she'd always tell them to hush and that he wasn't going to hurt me, and he never did. Another favourite thing of my papa's were white bulldogs. He absolutely adored them, and they were always named Fred. Even when he had 3 of them at once, they were all Fred. It became a running joke in the family, with my uncles no longer calling him Dad, but instead Fred, and he often returned the favour. At family gatherings, once everyone arrived, all you'd hear for a few minutes was, "Hiya, Fred. How's it going, Fred? Where were the kids, Fred? I wasn't talking to you, Fred. I was talking to Fred." As kids, this used to crack my cousins and I up, and for other reasons, you could see the women roll their eyes and walk away grumbling. This is important to the ghost part of the story. My papa passed when I was 18. My mum and I were at a horrible time in our relationship, and she refused to let me go to the VA hospital and tell him goodbye. We all knew he was dying, and he knew it too. The day he died, I was in my room destroying everything because my mom refused to let me go. I felt a hand on my shoulder, and when I turned, my papa was standing there smiling, healthier than I'd ever seen him. He smiled wide and said, "Did you think I'd leave without saying goodbye?" Then I heard the phone ring and knew it was Mama calling saying he was gone. Fast forward 9 years, and my son had just turned 2 and was playing with some toys in his room. I could hear him talking, but it was more like a conversation, not just playing. I went in and saw him laughing and asked him who he was talking to. At first, all he would say was "friend," but after a minute or two of pushing, he finally looked at me and said "Fred." And at this point, he'd refused to ever even look at Big Hero 6. I froze, because while I'd seen my papa many times over the years, I'd never really talked about him with my son, and we certainly didn't have any friends with that name. I asked him what Fred looked like, and he helped up one of his army guy toys and said, "This, but old." I didn't say anything else. I was emotional, but mostly happy that my son got to meet my papa. Over the next week, he continued to play with Fred. I asked once why I couldn't see him, and my son said, "For me only." That night, I took the picture of my grandparents out of the back of my wallet and laid it on the table. The next day, while my son was eating breakfast, he spotted the picture and snatched it up, yelling, "Fred!" He did eventually stop playing with Fred and never said anything about it. 3.5 years later, we had my daughter, and my son mentioned Fred a couple of times, and life continued on. When my daughter turned 2, she also began playing with Fred, but she called him Fred Pop Pop. She told me one day that he was my Pop Pop. What makes this all even better for me is that 3 of my cousins have also talked about their children playing with Fred. And we loved it, because when we started having kids, we all wished that he'd been around to meet them. I still see my papa in my house from time to time, but he mostly just walks around and looks in on the kids, and then smiles and leaves. Then a few days later, one of my cousins will message me saying that Fred stopped in for a visit. So now it's our joke that he's just making rounds, checking in on everyone. So all of these things happened in my now ex-boyfriend's house. I would spend a lot of time at his house overnight, as his neighborhood had more things to do, and his bedroom was more private than mine. We were both 19 to 21 during this time. First, I should mention that his family practices the Yoruba religion, and would leave water and offerings for individual deities. They were very in tune to that aspect of the universe. I had almost felt growing up that I could feel things and spirits. Not necessarily communicate, but I could feel them and acknowledge them, and was generally chill and not scared, as long as I knew I wasn't doing something to upset them, and vice versa. I would have the thought of, oh, that's a ghost, and kind of move on. In this house, his bedroom had a door that led down a flight of stairs into the backyard, and also into the basement. He has a washer-dryer down there, and further in was storage. It was a dark, damp, concrete floor. Not a place you want to hang out in. Occasionally, we'd go down to get the laundry, and I always found myself looking into the back of the basement, and just knowing I wasn't welcome to pass any further than the dryer. Even at the dryer, I can only explain it with clear words popping into my head. You're not supposed to be here. It was my own voice, and I would always leave quickly and sometimes give a nod of respect towards the back of the basement. I avoided going down as much as I could. Additionally, sometimes when in bed late at night, I would hear creaking on the stairs. At first, I summed it up to an old house settling and changing with temperature, but over time, I couldn't deny that it was the distinct sound of footsteps. It would always stop by the door to the basement, and I would stare at the door waiting for it to open. It never did. One day, we were sitting at the kitchen table with his mom and dad, and I don't remember how it got brought up, but I mentioned that I always felt unwelcome, and like I wasn't supposed to be in the basement. His mom and dad shot a wide-eyed glance at each other, and his mom said very matter-of-factly, "There's a ghost of an old man who stays down there." I immediately felt validated and got chills and described exactly where I felt unwelcome, and she confirmed that he does hang out in the very back of the basement. She also told me that she will leave a shot of whiskey for him when his activity picks up, as he's apparently cranky by nature, and it seems to calm him down for a few weeks. She said he was harmless, but I already felt that. He just didn't like me in his space. She left some whiskey for him the next day, and I think I spoke to him and somewhat told him who I was. The feeling of unwelcomeness never left, and I would still hear creeping on the stairs, but I made sure to acknowledge him when I went to the basement and never went into his space at the back of the basement. For the past 2 weeks, my family and I have been traveling around various countries in Europe. Unfortunately, we had our passports stolen in Belgium and had to make a couple last-minute changes to our plans, one of which included booking a hotel in a new city for one night. We stopped just for the night between trains in Cologne, Germany. I helped my parents find the last-minute reservation online, and it was a pretty standard apartment-style rental. When we arrived at the rental, we were all impressed by the views of the nearby cathedral and church spires, the shingled roofs, just the general feel of history that the whole town had. We went out for dinner and came back after dark, all heading to bed for our early train the next morning. I shared a room with my little brother, and my parents slept in the next room over. I remember asking them if we could swap rooms because I didn't like the layout of ours. There were too many doors for me to feel comfortable. I have a weird thing where I don't like sleeping near doors, and I can't sleep in a room with any doors left open. Anyways, they said no. We could just stay in the original room, which had doors to the kitchen, hallway, and 2 closets. I was too tired to push it, and I figured my fatigue would override my personal habits. So I just got ready for bed and tried to go to sleep. While I was sleeping, I remember having some cycles of regular dreams. Then all of a sudden, I woke up with another dream. I was lying in the same bed in the exact same room, and my little brother was lying in the same bed too. It felt like if I had just woken up normally. Now, I have very vivid dreams sometimes, but I never dream about being in the exact room I'm in, and I never wake up to a dream within a dream. In this dream, I was sitting up in bed, and so was my brother. I could feel that for some reason, we were both really scared, and there was this charged and anxious feeling in the room. I remember my little brother saying, "What is that? Get out your flashlight." At the same time, we were both looking at the far end of the room where it was darker and away from windows. It was like we were both too scared to speak, but I could feel that we were both sensing whatever dark energy was at the end of the room. I started to fumble for my phone flashlight just for some light, when all of a sudden this thing, the closest I can describe to it as a dark blob of energy, moved super quickly over next to my side of the bed, and my brother and I screamed at the same time as this thing rushed up next to me. That's exactly when I woke up for real, around 2:30 a.m. My heart was racing, and I was sweating so hard despite the room not being hot. I was so unsettled that I turned on all the lights in the room and didn't sleep for about 2 more hours until I could finally somewhat relax and drifted back to sleep. The experience was very disturbing for me. I never wake up in the morning for no reason, as I usually sleep throughout the night, and rarely, if ever, have nightmares. Now I'm wondering if anyone can comment on a phenomenon like this. Can people have paranormal encounters in their sleep while in certain spaces? Was I just having a vivid dream, or was that experience a signal that there was something in that space? My girlfriend and I went to visit an abandoned haunted mining town. There, we saw a child's bike all burnt and old, as it used to belong to the town before it caught fire. We thought it was creepy, so we went past it into one of the buildings. When we were in the building, my girlfriend heard a bang, and I heard a bike bell, so we went back outside to find the bike gone, with all char marks and residue gone, like it never existed. We continued walking around and found a more creepy building, and on the ground was some litter and a real amazing doorknob, that when we closed the door, it fell off the burnt wood. For safekeeping, I put it in my bag with intention of putting it back on the door, but while exploring, I completely forgot about it till we got home. My girlfriend lives in a Victorian house which has been maintained in its original state, except the additions of modern technology and furniture. So later, the next night, we began hearing chairs move upstairs and footsteps before the back door flung open, and my girlfriend's dog were going wild, barking at the stairs. We called our friend, who said there could have been a ghost that attached itself to the object of the door handle. We planned to take it back and fix it to the door to respect the spirit and apologize for removing it from the ghost town. But right now, my girlfriend is hiding under the blankets as we listen to doors slamming and footsteps from the landing.